It's Mark Schieldrop. As Courtney said, I work with AAA Northeast in the public affairs office. So before the pandemic, I might have come to your library, or I go to senior centers and I go to schools to talk about traffic safety. So we're Zooming these days and it's working out pretty well. So I'm glad to see so many people. So enough about me. You're here because you're interested in some driving in general. And so at AAA, we love sharing the gospel about safe driving. And for older drivers in particular, the research shows that the longer you drive, the longer you live. And people generally who drive longer or later in life tend to have happier and more healthier lives. And we find that when folks stop driving, the quality of life tends to decline. So we like to go out and try to help older folks continue their driving careers as long as possible and as safely as possible. So today, I'm not going to burden you with research data or anything like that. This is more conversational, just a few tips and pointers, and I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up. I don't want to make it a totally formal presentation, so it can be a little free-flowing. So let's dig right in. So this is a card that my colleague likes to share, and it's kind of funny. This is a greeting card she got once, and because we're in traffic safety, people often, when they're giving us gifts, they kind of joke around about it. So it says, you know, my eyesight's gone, my hearing's bad, my joints are stiff, and I have trouble staying awake. But thank God I can still drive, right? But so that kind of speaks to, you know, the issue that really we're very mobile dependent in our society. We depend on our cars for so much, to go to friends, to go to work, to go to shopping. And, you know, for many of us as we get older, the car is our key to socialization. So I know we're all Zooming these days, but in reality, you know, we need our cars to connect with other people. So you're familiar with normal 12-step programs, and this isn't so much like that, but these are 12 steps or tips that can help you drive longer and more safely. Let me go to the next slide here. So I'll dig right in, and there's actually more than 12 steps because we've added a few along the way. But the first thing, and I'll just say right off the bat, if you're an older driver, you've seen it all already. You know, there's a lot of this stuff that I'm going to mention that you know already, that you've already experienced or you practice those as well. But there are probably a couple little things along the way that might help you out. So if there's anything that you already know or practice, that's great. I'm not trying to insult anyone's intelligence. But sometimes we fall into habits. We get into routines and we get comfortable, and maybe it's good to have a little refresher to remind ourselves. And so the first thing that we tell folks is always assume the other driver will put you at risk on the road. So that's the hallmark of defensive driving. Most of the times when there's a crash, it could probably be avoided. The good news is that older drivers are safe drivers. You know, there's this sort of myth that older drivers are unsafe, and the data just doesn't support that. The reality is that older drivers are safer drivers. They tend to follow the speed limit. They tend to not drive aggressively. Older drivers are more familiar with traffic laws, and they're maybe less in a hurry to get places, so they're more willing to drive at reasonable speeds. And they're more cautious. And when we get older, we're really good at self-regulating. So you know your limits. If you're not comfortable driving at night, older folks tend not to drive at night. Younger people often don't know their limits, or they will drive and maybe they shouldn't. But that hesitance to go out when you feel unsafe, you know, that's fantastic. No, you should never go beyond your comfort level if you don't. We often say, your perception is your reality. So if you don't feel comfortable doing something, then you don't have to do it. But back to the slide. A lot of times when we're driving along, you'll see somebody, say, leaving a parking lot, and it looks like, you know, you can tell they want to leave and you're approaching. Assume they're going to not see you and bump out and hit you. whenever you're driving, you always assume that the person in front of you or behind you is going to do the wrong thing. And when you start anticipating that, and I don't mean being paranoid that everyone's going to crash into you, but more like, don't trust other people so much. A lot of the crashes that happen usually occur because somebody assumes that the person up ahead sees them. But if you drive under the assumption that they don't, you're just going to be all that more likely to react quick enough to avoid getting hit or to avoid the collision. So when you expect that person at the intersection not to do the right thing, you're much more likely to avoid a crash. So the main thing to prevent or to anticipate better is to establish a visual lead. A lot of times when we're driving, we tend to just sort of look at the vehicle in front of us and fall into following that car. So when that car starts to slow down, you start to slow down. The best practice is to look beyond the car in front of you and really try to look as far up ahead as you can so you can identify those things that are approaching and react accordingly. So you're looking for brake lights up ahead in the distance because frankly, the person in front of you might not be paying attention. They're looking at their phone. So if you count on that person to brake, well, if they're not paying attention and they crash into the car in front of them, then you're more likely to crash into that person in front of you. And you know what, older drivers, you've probably had somebody hit you from behind, or you've seen other people who are not paying attention hit the person in front of them. So you're more likely to be on the lookout for that. The thing is, when we're doing our routine driving, the trips that we make regularly, our regular commute, we tend to naturally, as human beings, let our guard down a little bit. We stop expecting the unexpected just because we do those routes so frequently that our brain just naturally starts to stop looking and paying attention as much because we have a comfort level. So you kind of have to break out of your comfort level in those routine driving. So yeah, visual lead is the key thing. So scanning, you know, look every 5 to 8 seconds in your rearview mirror, even on the highway. If you're not in the habit of checking your mirrors and kind of just monitoring your surroundings and keeping a slight mental picture of what vehicles are around you, try to get back in that habit of looking behind you, checking your side mirrors, and that way you just have much more likelihood of anticipating a situation and reacting in time. Now, the biggest thing, and this is probably, if there's one takeaway that I try to impart on people when I talk about traffic safety of all ages, is that we tend to follow too closely. And back in the day, maybe when you took driver's ed, and when I took driver's ed, the rule of thumb wasn't based on seconds, it was based on car lengths. So people would say, you know, about 2 car lengths is good, and then add a car length for every, you know, 20, 30 miles an hour or so. But over time, and research has shown that people have a hard time judging car lengths. That's sort of an abstract concept. And, you know, how long of a car are you talking about? And then, you know, car lengths based on speed. So now the recommendation is that you need to keep about 2 seconds of following distance from the vehicle in front of you or more. And that is under ideal circumstances. So 2 seconds or more under ideal circumstances. And when I say ideal circumstances, I mean middle of the day, perfect visibility, no sun glare, your windshield is clean, your tires are new, perfectly inflated, perfect visibility, no rain, you know, brakes are in great condition, everything's 100%. That's the minimum, 2 seconds. Ideally, you want to be 3, 4, maybe even 5 seconds behind. So when I say seconds, what does that mean? It's the amount of time that passes between the vehicle in front of you and your vehicle. So the way to calculate the number of seconds, say for example, you're on the freeway, and in this example, you're following the truck, look for identifying marker up ahead. Say overhead highway signs work really well, especially if they cast a shadow on the road, because then you can literally see when that vehicle crosses that landmark that you've identified, then start counting 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. When you cross under that same exact spot that you identified, see how long it is. And if it's less than 2 seconds, just lift your foot off the gas a little bit, add some distance, and then do it again. Now you do it mentally, you don't want to get distracted trying to do this, but it's a way to kind of gauge how much distance you have from the vehicle in front of you. And you'll find that after a while, you won't have to count. It'll become second nature, but it's a good way to identify how big is that gap. That gap is absolutely critical because the longer you increase that gap, you're drastically reducing your crash risk. The fact is most collisions that occur are low speed, rear-ending kind of collisions. And if you're following too close, you're really reducing the amount of time you have to react to the vehicle in front of you. And that means backing off a bit. And at first, if you're in the habit of following a little close, you feel almost like you're unnaturally too far behind. So you really have to retrain yourself to feel comfortable being a little bit further back. And then the other issue that comes up, and people say, oh, well, if I leave a big gap, someone's just going to pop right in front of me. Well, if that happens, lift your foot off the gas and then recreate the gap, right? You're not losing any time on your trip. There's been plenty of studies that show speeding doesn't really get you anywhere faster. And it's sort of an ego thing. You have to kind of like, you know what, some guy cut me off, he popped into my gap, you know what, take a deep breath, increase the gap, 2 minutes go by, you totally forget about it. And it just makes driving so much more relaxing and less stressful. And then when everyone in front of you slams on their brakes, you can gently slow down. You don't have to slam on your brakes because you have that gap. And then the guy who's behind you, following you too close, looking at their phone, your longer gap means you can slow down more smoothly. That means your brake lights are on longer. That increases the chance of that distracted person behind you seeing that you're slowing down. You're reducing the odds of getting rear-ended. And that's often how those collisions occur. Everyone's cruising along on the highway. Everyone's following too close. Suddenly there's a slowdown. And then boom, boom, boom. And if you drive on, particularly before the pandemic with the severe congestion that we've been going through in parts of Massachusetts, on my commute, it was on a stretch of 95 from about the Rhode Island border to around the Dedham area. Every day I saw these chain reaction crashes, 3, 4, 5 cars, they're all pulled over. They all have, rear end damage, front end damage, rear end damage, because everyone's following too close. And then that person on the end rams and it's just boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom. But then you can see where the chain reaction crash ended because somebody had a large enough gap. So that gap is absolutely critical. And then the other thing that people often don't do, especially young folks, is adjust their speed while they're driving. So in wet conditions, and remember, these are best practices. So there are times where you have to use your judgment, and it might be best practice, might not make sense for the exact situation, but the rule of thumb is that when the road is wet and it's raining, you should reduce your speed by 1/3. And when there's snow on the ground, you should drive 50% as fast. So, that's where a lot of the issues for people in inclement weather comes up. They're not, in the winter, it seems like every winter people forget how to drive in the snow. So that first snow, you watch the news that night, crashes everywhere. They show the cars spun out. People forget you can't go 65 miles an hour in the snow. Now, you know your limits. If you don't like to drive in the snow, that's great. Some people overestimate how dangerous it is. You don't necessarily have to completely avoid the rain entirely. It's safe to drive in the rain, but if you just need to slow it down a little bit. So the other thing is intersections. So a lot of times folks, when they're driving, they, kind of rely on the traffic lights, or they rely on other drivers doing the right thing. And intersections, that's the most dangerous situation. That's where a lot of the worst collisions occur. So anytime you're coming into an intersection, that's when you need to be alert. Always be the person who is willing to slow down. If somebody's right on your tail and you're approaching an intersection and the light's green, don't be afraid to take your foot off the gas and maybe even tap the brakes a little bit to slow down to a comfortable speed. If that person behind you doesn't like that, well, you know what, tough for them. Your safety is more important than pleasing the person behind you. You owe nobody anything on the road. A lot of times people feel pressured by other drivers. You know, you don't want to be the, you know, slow old lady driving down the road, but the reality is, you know what, you're doing the responsible thing. And by protecting yourself, you're actually protecting other people by modeling the safer driving behavior. So as you pull up to the intersection, just scan left or right, and then hover your foot over the brake. So that way, if you do need to react or slow down, you can do it quickly. A lot of time is lost moving your foot from the gas to the brake. So it's a good rule of thumb just to hover your foot over that brake pedal, even if the coast is clear and you have a green light, just you never know. And then getting back to the whole intersection thing, don't be the first person in the intersection. When the light turns green, you know, you're not drag racing. Always give it a quick double scan. You don't have to be the first person to launch in the intersection. People run red lights notoriously. You know, often we ask people, when the light turns yellow, what does it mean in Massachusetts? And people say, oh, you know, slow down, get ready to stop. No, in reality, when the light turns yellow in Massachusetts, that means gun it, because you got to beat the red light. You know, that's how a lot of people drive. And people are increasingly distracted. So I always double check, and it's saved my bacon a few times, especially with so many larger vehicles on the road. If you're driving a smaller car, you might not even be able to see what's going on in the intersection until you start going forward. So, you know, give it another pause, give it a quick scan. Signal early, signal clearly. You know, there's sort of a fine line between signaling too early and too late. So a lot of times people get rear-ended because you're driving, you see the, you got to make your turn on the blinker and start turning. That's not what you're supposed to do. You know, the other thing is you don't want to turn the blinker on and then drive through, you know, past 5 entryways and 4 intersections. Cause hey, I'm going to be turning in 2 miles. I might as well turn it on right now. So you want to do it ahead of time so that way the person behind you knows, okay, this person's going to turn. But there are situations where there's a shopping plaza with multiple entrances, plus there's a side road. You want to go on the side road, not the plaza, and someone wants to come out of the plaza. If you turn your blinker on, that person who wants to come out of the plaza might think you're signaling to turn on the plaza. So they shoot out, and then boom, you have a collision because you actually want to go past the plaza and then turn. But you know, this is, again, you need to use your judgment. It's better to signal early than late, but be mindful of the fact that you might cause some confusion if you signal too soon, because you don't want to make people think you're going to be going down a road or an entryway that you don't plan on going into. And again, that's rule of thumb. And if you crank the tunes and you got the windows down, and you're cruising down the highway and your blinkers on, you might not hear the blinking noise. So whenever you do use your blinker, maybe give it a quick double check to make sure that it turned off. Now, another key bit of advice, and this is something I see people do all the time, and this goes back to the whole putting your life and your trust in some random stranger and expecting them to do the right thing all the time. If you drive as if no one's ever going to do the right thing, this is where this technique really fits in. Stagger your position and stay at a pack. So you don't want to be driving parallel to another vehicle at 60 miles an hour for very long at all, especially because people aren't very good at checking their blind spots. Some people rely now on the lane or blind spot detection. So they just see if the light's on or off, and then they go for it, and you'll get sideswiped. So always try to position yourself so that way there's a clear gap to your left or your right. So, you know, God forbid something bad happens, you can quickly move out of your lane into the position next to you. So always try to make it so you have a clear spot on either side. Sometimes you can't help it. In stop and go traffic, it's pretty much impossible to do that. But if you're cruising along on the freeway and then some guy's just kind of sitting there right there parallel to you, you know, maybe take your foot off the gas a little bit, let that person creep up enough that now you've got that gap again, and then you can kind of speed back up and try to maintain that. It takes constant adjustment. If you're driving with your cruise control on and you've got someone next to you, you know, maybe consider tapping that brake, turning off the cruise control. The fact is that other people make mistakes all the time. So by just making sure you're not driving parallel to someone else, you're drastically reducing your crash risk. And going back to what I talked about, the gap earlier, keeping that gap bigger, by having that larger gap, now you've got that flexibility to adjust your position and keep that gap to your side. You're giving yourself breathing room. So now you kind of are in control of that space in front of you. So that space in front of you really is where you can exert the most control when you're driving, because sometimes you feel helpless. You're just in traffic and you hope for the best and you hope nobody screws up or crashes into you. Well, by keeping that gap, you're claiming a little bit of territory in front of you, giving yourself a little more control. And another thing, and you know, this is a bad habit a lot of people get in, the leftmost lane. If you're cruising in the leftmost lane, people are going to tailgate you. They're going to beep at you. They're going to whiz past you on the right. You got to get out of that lane. That lane's just for passing, only passing. And people make the mistake of just, well, I'm in the fast lane and I'm going fast, so I'm just going to stay in this lane and go fast. Like, now, you're supposed to go back over. You only are supposed to be in there when you're passing. And most people know this and understand this. And a lot of folks like to drive to the right or in the middle lane, which is good. Try to avoid the left lane. You know, if you're passing someone, use it totally. And there are plenty of perfect reasons to pass and to go a little quicker, to get around, say, a truck that's shedding debris or a landscaper truck. And, you know, you need to get around somebody sometimes. So use that left lane for that. Once you pass them, move back over. Use your blinker and move over. You know, it makes your life easier. You know, you don't want to be that one guy whizzing past everyone. You want to blend in a little bit, and you don't want to cause any trouble. You just want to get to where you're going. And by moving over and staying out of that left lane, the aggressive drivers will leave you alone. And the whole thing is you just want to be left alone. You don't need to prove any points. You know, you're not going to teach anyone any lessons on the road. No one's going to remember it. So just get out of the way. And you know what? If someone's driving like a maniac, let him go. You know, it's not worth the trouble. The other thing, and I wish I had a video to demonstrate this, is most of us, myself included until I worked for AAA, our mirrors are set up wrong. And I can almost guarantee you, probably everyone listening or watching this right now, your mirrors are set up wrong. Most of us, we set it up so our side mirrors, if you look in your side mirror, if you can see any part of your car, you're not doing it right. So you shouldn't be able to like lean over and do your makeup in the side mirror. In fact, the way most people set it up, their mirrors are really just duplicating what you already have in your rear view mirror. So there's a trick to drastically improve your visibility and basically almost eliminate blind spots entirely. So you don't even have to really twist your head much. Because when we get older, you know, and it's happening to me, you know, I'm 41 years old. I'm not 18 anymore, and my vision's starting to change. I'm at the age now where I'm beginning to notice like, oh, I think I need reading glasses. And at night, the glare is getting pretty bad. You know, I used to be able to drive all hours of the day and night in hail and rain, and I could see, and I was passing people. Now, at a dark night with the rain, I mean, it's halos everywhere. And I thought it was my windshield. I thought people's lights are too bright these days. Well, the research is my eyesight's getting worse. So it's not people's headlights are too bright. You know, it's my eyes. So the mirrors, the trick is, there's a few different ways to do it. But my favorite method, and you can do this in your driveway, sit in your car. Now, look in your rearview mirror, make sure it's lined up for your seating position, right? And you will see in your rearview mirror what you see, right? Then look at your side mirror. You don't have to lean or anything. From your normal driving position, look over at your side mirror, and you'll notice where there's overlap. So what you want to do is pick a point right where your rearview mirror ends. So some landmark, you know, a garden stone or the end of your driveway or a telephone pole, whatever it is. Then start moving your mirror out. So instead of pointing at you, it should be pointing out, and start turning it until where your rearview mirror ends, your side mirror begins. And you'll notice that you actually have almost a full panoramic view of your entire rear. And this means when you're driving and somebody's behind you, you'll see them in your rearview mirror, then they'll go to pass and whoa, you'll see them appear in your side mirror. And then as they pass you, you'll see them get closer and closer to your side mirror. And right as they move out of your side mirror, guess what? They're right next to you. So that way you don't have to twist your head around. You have a much better sense of who's around you. And I mean, it's like giving you a whole new set of eyes. One catch when you first do this is going to be a little jarring because we're very familiar with the angle. So when you change the angles of your side mirrors, your peripheral vision, your brain's going to notice something's different. The angle of movement in the sides of your peripheral vision, that's changed. So it's going to be a little disorienting the first few times you drive. So just be mindful of that. And I guarantee you, if you make that adjustment, when next time you're driving and you're in traffic or there's people on the freeway, you're going to be like, oh, wow, I'm so glad I did this, because now I feel like I have a much better sense of my position on the road. I know who's around me. It's just a lot easier. So adjust the mirrors. And there's Arnold Schwarzenegger there, road rage. A lot of times people get aggressive if people are honking at you, if somebody's having a bad day. Just try to steer clear. You know, you don't need, like I was saying earlier, you're not going to teach anyone safe driving by screaming and yelling at them, you know. And most of the time when people get completely road ragey, a lot of times it's because somebody else had them forced to change their speed or position. So if you drive in an effort to avoid causing other people to have to make sudden stops or slow down or speed up or change their position, you're going to be not as bothered on the road. Like, people aren't going to road rage towards you as frequently. I mean, it's inevitable. There are times where I'm just minding my own business. I'm not bothering anybody. I'm not blocking any traffic. I'm all the way to the right. Like, I'm not holding up anybody. And all of a sudden somebody's right on my tail and then they flip me off. I'm like, what did I do? Like, literally nothing. It's just somebody's having a bad day. So, you know, if you're a victim of road rage, don't make eye contact. Completely just ignore them. If it becomes very threatening feeling, you know, call 911 or head to the local police station. You know, if they're following you, don't go home. First of all, don't go home if somebody is road raging and like tailgating you or anything like that. But generally, if you're, say, gonna have to turn into busy traffic, you know, wait that extra 30 seconds until the gap is open. Don't cut anyone off, you know. And it depends on the situation. There are times where you really have no choice. If there's a lot of traffic and you have to get in, you know, you got to get in, you got to nudge your way in. And, you know, if people aren't being courteous, yeah, you might have to be a little more forceful to get your spot, you know. But if the road's open and you got some room and someone seems like they're hell-bent on causing trouble or having road rage, steer clear. You know, the worst thing is when somebody swerves, you know, or cuts them off or tries to exact revenge. You know, that guy cut me off, so I'm not going to let him get over. You know, don't. If someone needs to get over, just ease up on the gas. Let them get over. Let them take that exit. They're out of your hair. They're out of your mind, you know. You're not going to win any battles on the highway. Skidding. It used to be the advice was, you know, turn in the opposite direction of the direction your car is spinning. And there's all this sort of, you know, physics, you know, because of the gravitate, you know, people, you can't think like that when you're in an emergency situation. So if you're ever in a position where you're skidding and sliding, so you start to spin out on the highway, just use your instincts. Look at where you want to go and just steer towards it. So it turns out that all the advice in the world doesn't really matter if you just tell people to just try to point where they want to go, but really focus on looking at where you want to go, because your brain just has a tendency to actually steer correctly when you really are just looking at where you want to go. So when someone's learning how to ski and learn how to parallel ski instead of just doing the snowplow thing, they say, look at where you want to go. You know, they don't say, oh, lift your legs and turn it at this angle and then push. No, they say, look at where you want to go, and your body will go where it wants to go. And so that kind of happens the same thing when you're in the car. So just look at where you want to go, and you will kind of naturally steer that way. Another thing is, if you haven't taken a skid school or anything like that, and you know, when you feel comfortable doing something like that, you know, consider it. It's actually kind of fun. It can cost a little bit of money, but there are places that you can really get a hands-on experience learning how to handle situations like that. And I think any young driver before they get their license really should go to skid school. It makes a tremendous difference. So drive with headlights on in daytime. That's another tip. Most cars nowadays have automatic headlights or daytime running lights. If you'd like to turn them off because you don't like them running all the time, turn them back on. The data shows that you're just way more visible even during the day with the lights on. human beings, we just don't see things as well when we're not specifically looking for them. So pedestrians often might not, you know, they're going to see you so much sooner with your headlights on than without headlights on. And especially at certain angles of the sun during the day, certain elevations, you can be almost invisible even during the day without your headlights on. You turn the headlights on and suddenly you're lit up and you're recognizable. So leave those on if they're on automatically. If you don't have automatic headlights, you can manually turn your lights on. There's no law that says you can't run your lights during the day. Another tip is the zipper method to merge. This is really hard advice to give because to successfully zipper merge kind of requires everyone to play along. So if you're the one person that wants to do it right, but everybody else is doing it wrong, obviously you're not going to be able to do it. But this is where that gap comes back in. If you keep that gap and say you're on the rightmost lane and you're on the freeway and there's traffic that's trying to merge onto the freeway, if you have a bit of a gap, you're not going to be in that position where suddenly somebody's right next to you and then you're like, wait, do I speed up? Do I slow down? You know, how am I going to get over? There's a bit of a conflict point there. So the zipper merge, ideally, everyone on the freeway keeps a gap, and then people on the ramp trying to get on the freeway get up to highway speed and then just seamlessly blend together. Well, if everyone kept a gap and if everyone was willing to get up to speed on the ramp, then we'd all be able to zipper merge properly, but that doesn't happen very often. So I try to encourage it when I'm driving. You know, I keep my gap. If I'm trying to merge onto the highway, you know, I start accelerating. I make sure the ramp's clear in front of me. And then I look at the freeway and I try to identify where I'm going to merge in. I look and I say, okay, well, chances are by the time I get to the end of the on-ramp, I'll be about right where that car is. So he's got a gap behind him. So maybe I'll slow down a little bit and then merge behind them. And I try to identify and then I try to match their speed. So that way when I get to the highway, I just kind of join the crowd. That's where not causing other people to have to adjust their speed or position comes into play. Because really most collisions occur when you've disrupted somebody. So by merging smoothly, which means sometimes you got to give it some gas to get up to highway speed. You don't want to get on the highway 30 miles an hour below the speed limit, slower than everyone else, and slowly get up to speed. Because then you're going to have those people come rushing up behind you. Then they're going to try to get around you. And all of a sudden there's this chaos around you and it's stressful, you know? So sometimes you may need to go a little faster than you're used to get up to speed. You know, you can accelerate. You got a powerful car, you know, accelerate with purpose. Don't hesitate. But then again, I'm not saying take risk and shoot off the on-ramp and just hope for the best. You know, you have to kind of strategically plan your entry, and there's a wall of cars there and the traffic's not really moving that fast. You're not going to be able to merge. You're going to have to creep in and, you know, go with the flow. So use your best judgment, but you know, I think a lot of us could maybe accelerate with a little more purpose getting onto the highway. If you've ever gotten onto the highway and then suddenly someone's on you and you feel intimidated, well, maybe you could have gotten on the highway a little faster. Or sometimes if the highway's pretty open and there's a yield sign, go. Yield doesn't mean stop. Yield means only slow down if you have to yield to oncoming traffic. If there's no oncoming traffic, that yield sign might as well get chopped down. You know, so if somebody's behind you and they're driving aggressively and you're kind of like cautiously getting the highway, you know, maybe they can tell that the highway's clear and maybe they figure that out before you. So a lot of the time someone's behavior behind you is a reflection of, you know, their desire to go faster than you're willing to go and they're behind you. So everything's situational. When you turn a corner, turn your head. It's a pretty basic one. So yeah, definitely be on the lookout for sirens, or if there's a crash, you know, pay attention to the shoulder and try to move out of the way. Now, tapping the brakes thing, again, this goes back to the gap again. You'll notice I keep mentioning the gap because it's kind of the centerpiece to avoiding crashes. You're driving along, you're keeping your gap, you see there's a slowdown up ahead and you see that people are stopping. But the people behind you probably don't see it as quickly as you do. Because you have a gap and because you're paying attention and you're looking far afield beyond the car in front of you, tap your brakes. Even if you don't have to slow down right away, you have a little bit longer before you really have to slow down, tap them a couple times. What you're doing is sending a signal to the people behind you. Oh, something's going on up ahead. You're just buying more time for yourself and for everybody behind you. Because if you just wait until the last second before you slow down, well, what if the person behind you is not paying attention again? So it's just sending a signal. So I always do that when I'm driving, especially on my commute before the pandemic. Everyone's going 75, 80 miles an hour. And then all of a sudden there's a jam, you know, by the 495 interchange. And suddenly everyone's slowing down. And, you know, you've had those moments where you're cruising along and suddenly the car in front of you is slowing down. And then you see it getting closer and you're like, oh, I'm not braking fast enough. And you push the brake and you're like, ah. And then you stop and you're like, whew. And then you look behind you and you see the cars racing toward you. So that tap, that really helps. Also, there is a law, slow down, move over, if there is a emergency vehicle on the side of the road. And I think Massachusetts people are pretty good about this. Just anecdotally, I've seen people doing this where you need to get out of the rightmost lane and give first responders room, even if a AAA tow truck. So it's yellow, blue, or red lights. If they're blinking and they're on the side of the road, you are by law obligated to move a lane over, to give them room. There are times where you can't move over, so you slow down. That's why the law is called slow down, move over, but it is a law. And, you know, we've, at AAA, just in the last year, we've had about 4 of our drivers hit by cars while they're providing service on the side of the road. 3 of them, minor injuries. One of them was significantly injured, and, you know, he extensive, you know, broken bones, and, you know, he's lucky to be alive. And it happened on the freeway. And, you know, so any first responder will tell you how hairy it is on the side of the road. So just be mindful of that. So this is actually kinetic information, and I apologize, but AAA does offer driver improvement classes. So if you go to AAA.com/defensive driving, you can learn more. These fees are not relevant to this, so I'll skip over that slide. So now I'm going to talk quickly about new car technology, because I don't want to go for too much longer. I'd love to have a little Q&A or a chat with some of you folks about things that you want to learn more about or talk about, or if you have additional advice you'd like to dispense, because I depend on the wisdom of some of the folks. I love going to present and learn something from the people I talk to, because I'm not the total expert. You know, I'm still you know, relying on institutional knowledge in a lot of ways. So a lot of times people give me great pointers. So there's been a lot of research. The cars have been changing dramatically in recent years. So we have some recommendations, things to look out for, especially if you're buying a new car. There's like an alphabet soup of new technologies out there, and some automakers calls one thing another. And you hear about Teslas and autonomous driving and, you know, all these whiz bang doodads and stuff. And some things are really great and improve safety, and some things aren't. So, and it's funny to think that, you know, and I was born in 1978, and, you know, I don't think my parents had a car seat, you know, and it's kind of baffling to imagine that now. My parents, when I was little, we had a Buick Century station wagon with a front bench seat, and the armrest would fold down. And I remember being a toddler, like 3-4 years old, and my parents would let me sit on the armrest on the front seat, no seatbelt, cruising along. And then sometimes my dad would have to stop short. My mom's arm would come shooting out, you know, like my mom's arm was going to save me, you know. I don't think my parents would even, I mentioned this to them, and they just, you know, put their hands in their heads like, oh, it was a different time, Mark, you know, we weren't trying to kill you. So, you know, at one point, seatbelts, airbags, anti-lock brakes were considered cutting edge. Now, these are all standard features. You know, you can't buy a car without those things.
Mark,
so some more recent
may I interrupt and ask a question?
Yes, please, Courtney.
Which is, this sort of goes to the same thing. I'm about to buy a new car, but part of the reason I'm going to buy it is that I'm tired of being like in a sedan when everybody else is in an SUV.
Yeah.
And I find at night that their headlights are at my eye level. It's not just that I can't see, it's because I'm looking right into a headlight,
Yes.
which I find infinitely irritating.
I understand. Yeah, so that's an issue. It's happening a lot. So sometimes it's as simple as, when was the last time you really cleaned the inside of your windshield?
No, I'm a windshield cleaner.
Okay, and then you know, if some cars out there, if they have aftermarket lights, the headlights may not be positioned downward. So sometimes somebody gets aftermarket lights put in and they're pointed straight out, and that's you know, that's really blinding. And you're right. There's a lot more higher up vehicles on the roads, so that means the lights are higher up, and that's unfortunately there's not too much you can do about it, aside from trying to avoid looking at them directly and using one of the things here we have on the slide, safety features we love, automatic adaptive headlights. So some of the newer ones, which are pretty amazing, actually stay full beam all the time, even without cars coming toward them. However, they either use various technologies, sometimes like a little flaps, like many little flaps that like raise and lower, but it'll actually turn off a section of the light so you're not blinding the driver coming at you. It'll kind of steer the light away. So it kind of like forms and shapes the headlight dynamically as you're driving. So you're not blinding anyone, but you're blasting the road in front of you with light. So a newer car, if you have adaptive headlights, ask them, or maybe do a little research on the car and find out how sophisticated they are. I know Audi and Volvo in particular are really doing a lot of advancements in that. So, you know, depending on your budget, but these are the kind of things that filter down into the lower price segments. So I would say in about 5 years, you know, a Toyota Corolla will be able to do this. So that might help. Or consider getting a higher raised up vehicle to raise your driving position a little bit. It doesn't have to be a huge car necessarily. There's a lot of compact SUVs that are really just hatchbacks, but they're built a little differently to kind of look like a SUV, but really you're driving a Volkswagen Golf. It's just jacked up. So that might help.
Would you wear the yellow glasses like you wear when you go skiing?
Yes, there are special glasses designed for night driving. So do some research on that. I don't have any specific recommendations, but I would look. You may even want to, not to say you need to go to the eye doctor, but consult with an eye doctor. Because a lot of times they know what works and what doesn't, and what's safe and what's not, because some of their patients may have light sensitivity and not necessarily vision issues. Or, you know, clarity. So that may help too. But though that is definitely an option. Certainly you don't want to wear sunglasses and you can't tint your front window. But yeah, that is something to consider. That's a good question. That comes up a lot. The brightness of lights really comes up a lot. And part of it is new technology filters gradually into the market. So if you're driving an older car, you know, it seems like everybody's got the crazy bright lights and you don't. And all of a sudden you get a new car and you're driving, you're like, wow, I can see, this is unbelievable. And actually now you're that person with the bright lights. So good question. So other safety features that we love, blind spot detection. I've talked about it. It's fantastic. It prevents crashes. You know, people that aren't the best at checking their blind spots or whose mirrors are not set up the way I suggest, it lets them know that there's somebody right in their blind spot. So that helps. Heated seats and steering wheels. We love that stuff. If you're comfortable driving, it's one less distraction. Unless the seat starts burning your body and you need to turn it off, and you know, that's so. Once you're familiar with the car though, adjustable power seats are great. You know, a lot of times some people buy cars and don't even adjust the seat from the showroom. You know, spend some time in that seat, adjust it. Pull out that owner's manual. You know, if that owner's manual is still in your glove box, shrink wrapped, take it out, unwrap it, put it on your nightstand. So when you have trouble sleeping some night, you know, you watch the news and you're all stressed out after watching the news. Like that happens to me some nights. You know, I want to go to bed early and I make the mistake of seeing what happened, and next thing you know, I'm up till 2 a.m. That owner's manual will put you to sleep, but also you might learn something about your car that you didn't even know. One-touch power windows, fantastic, especially now with so much drive-up stuff that folks are doing. Rear view cameras, those are standard now. You have to have a rear view camera in any new car today. So if you get a new car, that's going to be there. And that's great. Now, rear view cameras, they're wonderful. However, they're not a perfect solution. You still need to make sure you're clear. Don't count only on the rear view camera. You know, you always want to be situationally aware, and just relying on the camera can be disorienting, and you might not check the back sides of your car. You're really only looking out the back. If you buy a, you know, $250,000 Mercedes S-Class, there's sensors all around the car. I mean, you go in reverse, it actually shows you a three-dimensional like picture of your car, and it shows you everything going on around you and recreates it in 3D. I mean, it's phenomenal. But, you know, typical rear view camera, you know, it's not, you should always just double check with your own eyes too. Transmissions that are probably brakes on hills. I mean, my first car was a Volkswagen Rabbit 4-speed, and that thing, it would roll on a hill, even with my foot all the way to the floor. So I'd have to kind of like give it gas, you know, rickety old cars like that. Nowadays, you know, there are transmissions where even if you're driving a stick shift, it'll hold the brake for you and let it go automatically. So you don't have to worry about rolling backwards. Remote starters, you know, I'm not personally a big fan of remote starters. I know we have it here on the things we love. I find that a car generally will heat up or cool down relatively quickly. It's not that great for the engine just for it to sit there idling, especially in the winter. And then there's also been many instances of people, you know, suffering health consequences because their remote starter accidentally got triggered and the car is in the garage, and carbon monoxide, and, you know, but the thing is, if it comes with your car, it comes with your car, you know, and you may not be able to opt out of having it. So just be mindful of that, I guess. Bluetooth systems, you know, we plug our phones in now. Trip computers, things that we hate. Now, these are things that are red flags for us. So if you're shopping for a car, one big thing that happens all the time, and it's very disappointing, is that when people buy a car, they're so quick to sell you the car, but they don't want to spend any time with you going over all the technology and features. Or you ask and they don't even know, you know. So you can insist on, I want an hour of one of your text time or something to literally teach me how to program my phone. You know, have them say, show me how to call my grandniece, and, or, you know, adjust say I'm driving and it's too cold, I want to turn the fans down. What do I do? You know, because you don't want to be trying to figure that out on the fly while you're driving. Or, you know, use that manual that's on your nightstand now and read through it. And then practice in your driveway. You know, you want to practice. You've invested all this money in this beautiful vehicle. You know, we spend so much time researching sometimes, you know, what's the right laundry basket to buy, but then we buy this car and we just kind of like drive it and turn it off and don't even think about it. So spend some time getting more intimate with it, you know, and getting to know the ins and outs. We hate how you can buy cars without a spare tire. Sadly, you know, so the manufacturers save money that way, save weight. The spare tire uses up a little bit of weight, so they chip away a gram here, a gram there. That's how they get that fuel economy rating up, you know, 1 mpg per amount a year. You know, they got rid of the spare tire that helped nudge it up. Hey, if you don't have a spare tire, you're more likely to get AAA, and that's good for us. But from a consumer's perspective, a lack of spare tire is an issue. Clocks with hidden adjustments. The main lack of knobs. For a few years, there were a number of brands that were selling cars with no physical buttons. Everything was like touch and slide. I think Cadillac had a system that was universally hated. Ford was doing this for a while. Fortunately, it looks like automakers are kind of gravitating back to buttons and knobs, and they realize that, like, when you're driving, trying to slide your hand on a piece of glass makes no sense. It's easier to just be able to push a button or twist a knob, you know? So we're getting back to that a little bit.
Mark?
Yes.
I think we have a question.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to unmute Pauline for a second.
Oh, okay, Pauline. Fire away. Oh, I think you're muted, Pauline. I can't hear you. Oh, there you go.
Okay. I have a car that's 13 years old, okay? And it only has 67,000 miles on it.
How
Well,
much
I do tend to keep cars for a long time.
Great.
I've only had 3 cars in I don't know how many years, a long time. But I wonder if a car gets to a point that it's unsafe. You know, now with the inspection sticker people, if they saw all this rust underneath and that, would they turn you down?
Well, hopefully, if they're a reputable shop and the car is actually unsafe to drive, they would let you know, and it would fail inspection. That doesn't mean old cars are automatically unsafe. You know, if it's got a seatbelt and an airbag and it's physically sound, it's perfectly safe to drive. you might miss out on some of the more advanced safety features. You might not be able to rely on blind spot monitoring. The main thing that we're concerned about, and 13 years and only 60,000 miles, I mean, that's fantastic. But, you know, how old are your tires? Can I ask you that? When was the last time you got new tires?
Honey?
Your tires. Do you know, how old are your tires? When was the
Oh,
last
my
time?
tires are new,
Okay, good. Because a lot of times somebody doesn't drive very often.
and one's newer than the others. Because I got a puncture in it.
Like if you had tires that looked good, like decent tread, you know, say you're just driving in the grocery
They have
store.
a very good thread on them.
Right. But for example, though, there are folks just like you, they have a 13-year-old car with only 60,000 miles and they've never gotten new tires. Even if the tires look good, they rot out, they dry out. Like
They
you need
dry,
to replace them in
yeah.
about 5 years. And like you said, rust, if you have a trusted mechanic, you know, you can even say like, just give the car a look over. Let me know if I got some rot, you know, the frame's rotting, you know, but
Yeah.
if you've taken decent care of the car and changed the oil,
Oh,
change your tires, you
Yeah.
know, at 13 years old, if you haven't, you know, have the belts and the hoses looked at, you know,
Yeah.
general maintenance, your car can last a very long time.
yeah. We even got the inspection sticker in June.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It was due in May, but they came and picked it up for me.
I mean,
Took
13
it
years
over
ago,
and brought it back to me.
I mean, 13 years ago was what, 2007?
Yeah.
Yeah, by 2007, cars had gotten to the point where we could say cars are a lot safer than they used to be.
But the other thing I find, I have friends who have bought brand new cars, and they tell me half the stuff in there they don't use.
Well, that's it. And people get overwhelmed. And a lot of times all this stuff just serves to be a huge distraction. And
Yeah.
then you're increasing your crash risk, right? So if your car is like beeping at you and talking to you and things are lighting up and you can't figure out how to get something to work and it's becoming more complicated just to do basic things, then that's less safe than a more simple car that you can operate safely, you know, because a lot of times it's not the car that's you got to worry about, it's the driver, you know.
Do you think
But
that,
if you got seatbelts and airbags, if seatbelt and airbags in an older car is going to protect you more than any thing.
do you think some manufacturer might come up with a simpler car that has all the safety features that you need?
Yeah, so
Probably not.
a lot of the safety features are trickling down, you know. So I bought a new car last year. I bought a Toyota Corolla, and it comes now. Toyota, you can't buy a Toyota without their whole safety system. Toyota
Right.
safety nets, like from the cheapest car they sell to the most expensive, they all have the same package,
The same with a Honda.
the whole thing. So that's one of the reasons why I got it. You know, I have little kids. You know, I drive. It's just a commuter car. I haven't been driving much at all lately, but you know, I like knowing that I didn't have to step up to the Avalon or the, you know, the higher end Toyotas to get all the safety features. So definitely it's coming down a bit. It's, you know, you get what you pay for a lot of times, but manufacturers know that safety sells. And also when one manufacturer starts doing something, it tends to compel other manufacturers to do it. Now, when you buy a luxury vehicle, say you want to get a BMW or a Mercedes, that's where it starts to get a little more a la carte. And you're going to still have a safe vehicle, but you might find yourself having to pay a bit additional for some of the more advanced safety features. So,
Yeah, thank you.
yep. Yeah, so then I'm going to speed through some of the rest of these slides because you folks have all been wonderful. I don't want to take up your whole evening. It's getting late. Other things we hate, you know, clunky seats, premium fuel. I mean, sometimes you have no choice, but, you know, premium fuel sometimes is, you know, it's just another expense. Dummy trim covers where optional features would go. You know, if you buy a car, there's nothing worse. You buy a nice car, but you didn't buy the top end model. And then you look at your dashboard and you got these like little plastic squares where like the nicer car has buttons, you know, it's like, come on, you couldn't put something nicer there. Like, you know, so safety sells. So that's good. That means that more manufacturers are motivated to make safer cars. Older drivers benefit from a lot of these safety features once you're familiar with them and use them. And, you know, there's the potential of saving lives. You know, the bad news is most of the drivers don't understand the limitations of the safety system. So people like with Teslas, we hear about these just recently in Massachusetts. I think a state trooper was crashed into by somebody driving a Tesla in autopilot mode. And unfortunately, Tesla calls it autopilot, and we think that's almost criminal because it's not. It's not an autopilot system. It's only level 1 autonomy. So that means it's not a self-driving car. You can't buy a self-driving car today. Technically, in the way autonomous systems are classified, there's no such thing as a self-driving car anyone can buy today. It has advanced autonomous driving features, but it doesn't mean that you can take your eyes off the road and take a nap or relax. You know, you have to stay focused on the driving. You're supposed to be able to intervene and take over at a moment's notice. No car is at the point where you don't have to take over anymore. We're not there yet. That's level 3. We might not see that for another 5-10 years. People don't understand these limitations, so they rely on these systems too much, or they don't know how they operate. We've actually did a study at AAA where it's funny. When someone gets a car with, say, adaptive cruise control, which is a cruise control that speeds you up and slows you down depending on the traffic, it's pretty nice. In stop and go traffic, you can just sit there and the car just goes and then stops and then goes and then stops. Oh, you don't have to keep dealing with the gas and the brake. It's wonderful. The first time people use it, study shows that people are paying super attention because they're nervous the system's going to fail. They're like, this is crazy. I can't believe the car is literally driving itself in traffic or lane keep assist. It's like, I barely have to turn the wheel and it's staying in lane. Like, this is unbelievable. My car's driving itself. It's crazy. You're hyper-focused. Well, if you start getting the habit, guess what? You stop paying as much attention because you start trusting the system. Well, I do it all the time. It works great, you know, and then you let your guard down and then all of a sudden you're not paying attention and you need to step up and intervene. And guess what? You're conditioned to rely on the system. So that over-reliance on the system causes misuse and then crashes because people stop paying attention. So there's sort of a double-edged sword. It's like using those things can improve safety. If everyone used adaptive cruise control and stop and go traffic, there'd be no rear-end collisions, right? Because all those systems would prevent that from happening. So use those systems to your advantage, but always be ready in case something goes wrong. Keyless ignition, it's hard to buy a car with regular keys. Rear view cameras are great. Adaptive cruise control I just mentioned, blind spot monitors we mentioned, forward collision warning. This is where you're about to bang into somebody and goes beep, 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 and warns you. My wife has a Honda where it's like brake, brake, it flashes. Works great. If you somehow get distracted or something happens, you have a child in the backseat screaming, you know, it's prevented a lot of crashes, but it's not perfect. My wife actually, and we had a real hair-raising moment. She was driving on a wide open highway. There was nothing in front of her. She had a tractor trailer behind her. Suddenly the car started beeping and it initiated auto emergency braking and literally came to a dead stop on the middle of the freeway in Connecticut on 95. There was no obstruction. There was nothing. The tractor trailer behind her had to slam on its brakes and like swerve around her, almost crashed. I mean, imagine driving down the freeway and someone in front of you just slams on their brakes for no reason. Well, my wife's car did it automatically by itself. And there was no explanation. We called Honda. They said, oh, it must have been a plastic bag or something or debris in the road. My wife, no. We don't have a dash cam, unfortunately, so we didn't have like video evidence of it happening. I did some research. Turns out this has happened a bit around the country. And there's been kind of like stealth, like when you take your car in for an oil change, they hook it up to a computer and they install software updates and do all this stuff. They're reprogramming these systems and adjusting them. So now my wife turns it off. She was so traumatized by that. 2 little girls in the back of the car. She almost got smashed by a tractor trailer because the system that's supposed to keep her safe failed. So, you know, keep that in mind. These systems help you, but they're not a perfect solution. And I don't want to scare you and say, don't use forward collision warning or automatic emergency braking. It's going to stop you on the highway. You know, it hasn't happened again. And now it's at the point where she forgets to, because it turns back on every time you turn the car off. So you have to manually disable it every time you go for a drive. So she was doing that. We drove recently on a pretty long trip and I drove and I would forget to turn it off and it worked fine. And there was no issue. So it's like, is it going to happen again? Is it not? But now we're uneasy. We don't feel like we can trust it, you know, and that's unfortunate, but.
Mark?
Yes.
This is Gail Smith. I have a question about,
Yes.
I have a question about cruise control, which your discussion didn't actually address.
Yeah.
I drove to Buffalo a couple of times and only in that kind of situation where it's a long, you know, straight road, there's not much traffic and a whole bunch of it. I tried to use the cruise control and I did use the cruise control, but I hesitate to use it because it makes me not pay attention.
That's it. Yeah, it's almost like when you don't have to have a foot on the pedal, and you just kind of, especially when it's open and kind of straight, you know, I get drowsy, and you know, the worst is when you start kind of getting sleepy, you know, and I'm not saying that that's what happened to you, but you're right there. If that
I mean, it lulls you into not paying attention. Is what
it does. And you know, if you ever had to suddenly make emergency action, it's like you think, oh, well, I got to hit the brake. But, you know, if your foot's not where the gas pedal is, and you're, you know, when we have to emergency stop, we're used to like lifting our foot and then moving it over. Well, if it's flat on the ground, are you good at that motion? Is your brain, you know, you're going to flail. Remember when there were all those unintended acceleration issues with the Toyotas where they thought the floor mats were getting caught and they had the big recalls, and there were people literally just like driving full speed into buildings in the Priuses. And people thought there was a design flaw or there was something wrong with the floor mats, and Toyota changed the mats. And well, at the end of the day, all the research, all the evidence, and the forensic analysis took years. They concluded that people were just pushing both pedals and panicking, so the car would keep going. It wasn't a flaw with the car; it was human behavior. So they changed the design of the pedals a little bit, and now, if you buy a car and you hold the gas and the brake at the same time, the computer will just kind of like stop the acceleration, and it'll tone it down, because that's generally what happens when you see somebody drives into the side of a building. It's because they panic, and then they think they're hitting the brake, but they're hitting the gas. So my recommendation to you is, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, turn it off, drive normal, right? We're not obliged to use those things. I'm in the same boat. I've used it. I've used the cruise control. I've used the automatic cruise control, which I have in my car. I find it a little jarring because I like to be smooth. I like smooth transitions. When I use the automatic cruise control, it's almost like robotic, where the car slows down. It's like it kind of jerks me slow, and then if it suddenly opens up, it's like Mario Andretti's driving the thing. It's like to get back to speed. It's like, you know. And I have a little computer that shows me like the mileage I'm getting. And when I use the cruise control, it's like so abrupt at the speed up and slow down that it kind of starts to hurt my mileage. So I find that I'm better off without it. It's been handy in certain situations where, you know, it's worked out for me. But yeah, I think over-reliance on those things is bad. There are people who literally like, oh, you know, I love commuting now because I just flip it on and then I can just like, listen to my podcasts and not really worry about stopping and going. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but are you letting your guard down enough that you're not ready to anticipate the unexpected? Because, you know, I was saying earlier, that's what you have to be ready for, is the thing from left field, you know, that tire hopping across 4 lanes because it blew out on a truck coming up on the other side of the highway. You know, it's all those horrible crashes you hear about. You know, someone's driving along and then just suddenly something's in front of them, or like a deer collisions. You know, that's another biggie.
Thank you.
You bet. So yeah, this is just some detail about some of these things we've already talked about: forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking. This is what I mentioned with my wife. This stuff is pretty impressive and interesting when it works. AAA, we did a study, and it turns out that these systems are terrible at detecting pedestrians. And at night, the systems are much less effective. So it turns out that the systems failed more than 75% of the time at night when turning right. And that's where 90% of pedestrian fatalities occur, in intersections when someone's turning right at night. So it's like when the system is most needed, it fails the most often. So you still need to focus. And that's kind of the recurring theme with all this technology. It's no replacement for paying attention. We're just not there yet with autonomous technology. Lane departure warning is useful. If you have trouble tracking in your lane cleanly, nice and solid, it can be helpful. The thing is, sometimes these things are more distracting. You know, it's like, if you need the beep, okay. But my wife, for example, to go back to her Honda, her lane departure warning system like shimmies the wheel back and forth. And it's the most unnerving thing. You're driving along and suddenly the wheel's like, so you feel like you have to like, not, I don't know. To me, it's jarring, and it caused me to kind of like swerve a couple times when I first felt it and reacted to it. Now I learned like, okay, when the wheel shimmies, just hold tight. You know, it's just warning me. It's not actually trying to turn the car, but my brain, when a wheel moves, the car moves. So for the wheel to move, but the car not to move, telling me I need to move the wheel, disorienting. And another instance is narrow bridge, very narrow shoulder, 2 cars, 2-lane road, you're driving along, there's traffic coming your way, and there's a bicyclist, right? So you need to cross over the yellow line to go around the bicyclist. Well, the shaking of the wheel, I actually had to almost like break out of the system. It wanted me to crash into the bicyclist. Like, it was very difficult to do a typical maneuver. Normally it's very easy. You just drift over a little bit, drift back, right? You're being safe for the bicyclist. Well, with this system activated, it was stressful. I felt like I didn't have full control of the car. I felt like I passed that bicyclist too close, and I wasn't really able to just have full control of the vehicle, even though I was trying to keep me safe. So again, these systems, they can't visualize every scenario as it comes up. So that's why when you have one of these new cars with these systems, expect the unexpected, practice with them, and when you least expect to have an issue with them is when it's going to happen. Like, I never in my wildest dreams thought I would struggle to pass a bicyclist on a road until I had a car with one of these systems. Lane keep assist, we already talked about. Automatic parking, you know, that some cars have that. It can be useful. Some of them though require you to actually do the brake and the gas, and you know, really it's not that much of a help because you're still laboring to park. Newer cars you will find will park themselves. It's going to be pretty impressive in the next few years, especially. You'll just literally tap on the parking spot on a screen. It'll show like an overhead view of the area. You just tap on the spot and it'll just park for you. Eventually cars will be, you get out of the car and it'll just roam around and it'll find a spot, it'll park. When you're ready, you push a button and it'll roll up in front of you. Tesla is already working on that. Adaptive headlights I mentioned earlier, you know, they kind of steer, they aim, so they're pointing at the road. It helps reduce glare and improve visibility. The more this technology gets adopted in America's fleet of cars, the better. Keep in mind, the average age of a car on American roads is 11.5 years old. So it takes a long time for this technology to come into play. You know, we talk about this new car technology is going to change driving. Well, in reality, it's going to take 20 years, right? Because people hold on to their cars for a long time. Cars are expensive. New car loans are averaging 72 to 80 months now. People aren't buying cars in 4 years and paying them off. So it's going to take many, many years before every car on the road has all of these features. So when you buy a new car, you know, we just say, focus on the safety features, ergonomics, comfort, you know, don't buy a car you're not comfortable in. You know, sit in it, spend time really thinking about yourself getting in and out of every day. So, you know, I'm sure you're all savvy consumers. And so if you have issues with your hips, legs, knees, you know, it's difficult. 6-way power adjustable seats are critical. Get in a fully adjustable seat, you know, don't skimp out on that. It's worth the extra money because you can really tweak it to your liking. Comfortable seat, low door threshold. So that means like a lot of folks, older folks love the Kia, what's the name of it? Or it's a little bit raised vehicle. I don't know if it's a Sportage or, but anyways, some of those CUVs or SUVs, people love them because you can just kind of like, you don't have to crouch down and slide into it like a Lamborghini, you know, you just, it's almost like you're stepping into the vehicle and you can sit down without having to contort your body very much. So spend time getting it out of the car. Spend some time at the dealership doing that. Adjustable brake or foot pedals, that's another thing. If your car has those features, consider that something to help you with the lower pain. If you have arthritis, finger pain, or diminished fine motor skills, you know, 4-door models, you obviously don't have to be getting people in and out by moving the front seat. It's hard to not find a 4-door car these days, so some of this stuff is a little dated. You know, as much power stuff you can get. Thicker steering wheel, that can help. Rain sensor, that's kind of neat because then it'll run your wipers for you, even if, you know, there's just a little spritzel. That way you don't have to fiddle with the stalk while you're driving. Larger dash controls, you know, that can help. Auto dimming rearview mirror, that's a key thing. If you get blinded at night, make sure you get a car with an auto dimming rearview mirror. A lot of times, if you look at the center of the mirror, it's got that little flap where you can flick it, and the mirror kind of changes its angle at night. And what it does is there's like 2 layers of material inside the mirror. And one angle, you're seeing the full reflectivity. And then when you flip that little thingy, it changes the angle, and it's more of it. That angle reflects a little bit more filtered light. So it helps reduce some of that glare behind you. So you can do that, but they have mirrors now that are auto dimming that just do that for you automatically, which is good. You know, and even a car with less technology, that may be best for you. You know, you don't need all the whiz bangs and doodads sometimes. Buttons, you know, I would advise against a highly touch screen interface. If you have an iPhone and you want a car with Apple CarPlay, that's great. CarPlay systems are pretty easy to use if you haven't used it before. I use it in my car, it's good. It's not distracting. It can be totally a distraction, but as far as using the radio, making phone calls, that kind of thing, it's a lot better than manipulating the phone, which is against the law, by the way. So if you have upper body range of motion, you know, there's other things that can help just physically be more comfortable. A lot of the stuff we already talked about. You know, adjustable seats are a big thing. If you're a little on the heavy side, same thing. Adjustable seats are big. So we have a resource for older drivers called seniordriving.aaa.com. A lot of the material I've talked about is featured there. Other resources, we have a Roadwise RX program, which is a free website where if you're on a prescription medication, a lot of times your doctor might not really get into the impairing effects. So a lot of older folks are getting driving under the influence charges for their prescription meds. That's actually the fastest subgroup of people getting DUIs are senior citizens because of medications. So actually at AAA, we're working with pharmacies, with doctors, the medical community, trying to like raise awareness about making sure people realize that their medicine might be impairing. You know, you look at the pill bottle that says, you know, do not operate heavy machinery. And people are like, oh, I'm not going to drive a forklift. And then they hop in the car. Well, your car is heavy machinery. So you can type in the medications that you take and it'll tell you if there are things to be concerned about with your driving or a combination of medicine. Totally confidential. No one takes your information. It's a resource there. So the key takeaway is, you know, all these safety systems are great, but it doesn't replace good driving habits. So yeah, read that owner's manual. And I've got some other links up on the screen for safety systems for older drivers. And if anyone has any other questions, and I've been talking for a while now, so I hope somebody learned something or got some good pointers and the last thing I'll say before we open it up and then wrap it up is that I love to tell people, don't put yourself in a stressful situation you don't have to. You know, one of the first times I ever gave a talk like this was to a group of seniors. And I said, if you have to go through this intersection in your town and you hate it, that one intersection that you just get stressed out on, it always seems to be craziness, it makes you uncomfortable. Well, when was the last time you took the long way? You know, why not turn left? You know, most of the time when we are going to get into a crash, it's during left turns and intersections. That's a high risk scenario. Well, have you ever thought about taking a different route where you only take right turns? You know, instead of going through a crazy intersection, well, what about going into the shopping plaza and then you go in and then you loop around and then you can come out and then you can use the shopping plaza red light to turn left instead? You know, nobody's forcing you to take that quicker route that's stressful to you. You know, when was the last time you pulled out a map and looked at where you need to go and try to plot out the route that's more leisurely? You know, have you leave 10 minutes earlier, take the back way, you avoid that main road, you avoid that intersection, take control, you know? And after I said that, you know, she came up to me, she's like, you changed my life. I'm like, well, no, I just giving you basic advice. But she said, no, I never thought about it that way. I realized just by you saying that, so many times I feel like I have to drive a certain way or a certain time, you know? And I realized that, like, you know, like I can go about it in a different way. No one is forcing me to drive through that one particular spot I hate, you know? And I do that myself. I take a weird way to get in and out of my city because there's one road that's the fast way, but the road's completely decrepit. It's falling apart and rocks and tar go flying and people, there's sort of a blind curve. And then there's this weird three-way intersection where you have the right of way, but you're going across cross traffic and there's no stop signs. And it's like all the locals know the flow, but if anyone from out of town comes, like it's just chaotic. So I always feel a little pit in my stomach as I approach it. Well, now I take a longer way where I just go straight. It takes me an extra 3 minutes, but I don't have to deal with that. And you know what? I've never regretted losing that 3 minutes of time, but I certainly would regret having to go through that intersection if I didn't have to. So that's my advice. If anyone has any comments or thoughts, I'd be happy to hear them and chat. And maybe if somebody has any tips they've picked up over the years to make their life easier, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. Thank you. Everyone seemed to stay on. I'm amazed I didn't put
There's-
you all to sleep.
We have one comment. I don't know your name, and I'm trying to unmute you. I think you can go
I
ahead.
think I just,
There you go.
hi. We are in the position of probably buying a new car because we have one very old car. And we're looking at a moderately priced car with safety features. Are you in a position, Mark, to recommend any particular models?
Yeah, I would almost think you should reach out to my colleague, John Paul. He's the car doctor. Now, he actually has a radio show, call-in radio show. He has a column in the Boston Globe. He reviews cars. So the automakers give him test cars to drive around. So he is way more on top of the latest and greatest and kind of the changes from model year to model year. But, I bought a car last year, so I did a bit of research. And I'm a bit of a car enthusiast myself, so I'm pretty up on it. But a lot of it boils down to brand preference. But, I think if there's a brand that's well known for safety, there's probably a good reason why. So Volvo is, very well known for safety. Their cars are very safe. Generally, it's kind of hard to buy an unsafe car these days. It really is. The key thing is size. So the larger the vehicle, generally the safer it is, just because you have more crumple zone, you have more, space between you and the other car. So the crash force has, is dissipated more before it reaches the passenger cabin. Personally, I'm kind of a fan of Toyotas just for the reliability. It just seems like you see those old Camrys and Corollas on the road forever because they're just very reliable. Their manufacturing processes are very efficient. I think in initial quality, like it's very rare to have some problem with your Toyota when you get it. I bought a Chrysler product a couple years ago. I bought a Dodge Charger, it looked good. I was like, I want a big American muscle car. And it was great first couple years, but little things like plastic trim would rattle or, the bottom of the seat foam, like I vacuum the car. I'm like, what is this like orange dust forming under my car? I realized that the cushion underneath my seat was slowly disintegrating over time. So like I noticed the seat was laying out and it's just that little quality detail. The car market's amazing right now, really. I mean, the cars are absolutely incredible. And all the automakers have really done a good job. Although, I don't know if I'd buy a Fiat now. And also the other thing to consider is with the automakers are going through yet another crisis. I don't think we're going to see, too many, Ford's not going to go belly up, I hope not. But I would say I'd probably feel a little more comfortable buying, something like a Toyota or a Lexus or a Honda over a more boutique, smaller brand like Fiat or, even Chrysler, like the thing is Chrysler has the Ram pickup and I mean, they're printing money with those things. So, but really I think, what do you like? What speaks to you emotionally? You want to love your car. You want to care about your car. For some people, a car is an appliance and that's fine, then look at fuel economy, safety, and reliability, and then call it a day. But, if you feel a little passion about your car, that's good because then you'll take better care of it. You'll enjoy driving it. and just don't hesitate to take a test drive and ask for another one and hem and haw about it. And and another thing is Consumer Reports has good reviews. Maybe subscribe to Car and Driver for a few months. Go online, go to YouTube. You'll see a lot of reviews there. There's so many resources that you can just get at your fingertips now. So I definitely do that. But if you want, I can send Courtney John Paul's contact information. He fields email questions like that all the time. People ask him for his advice all the time. So
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Pauline also has a question.
yes, Pauline.
I just wonder, what do you think about Consumer Reports auto issue?
I think it's pretty good. Consumer Reports, I listened to a Consumer Reports podcast, actually. And AAA, we're friendly with them, and we've worked with them on various studies, and they pay attention to the work we do, our research institute. What I like about Consumer Reports is they buy all the cars they test, and they drive them for real. They don't just take the automakers like, oh, here's our test car. Why don't you drive it for a week and then write a nice review? So a lot of times if you go on the internet and, it's like, oh, we drove this car and it's fast, it's amazing. They don't want to criticize the car because then the automaker might say, well, you were so harsh on that car. We're not going to give you test cars to drive anymore. So they cut people off. Consumer Reports says, no, we don't want the automakers to try to butter us up with, fancy, they invite you to a hotel, they put you in a room for 2 nights, they take you into that's what they do. Dodge and Ford and Chevy, they take automotive journalists, they fly them to, the Moab, and they put them in this $50,000 truck, and they, go rock climbing and drive in the mud and, take it for 3 days and camping. And, so these guys have these amazing experiences, and then they write glowing stories about how amazing it is to drive this, Chevy in the mountains. So Consumer Reports, they literally buy them with their own money. They're not in the, they're not in the business of pleasing the automakers. They really try to thoroughly and pretty scientifically review them. But there are times where I've disagreed with them, where they criticize a vehicle for something. This happens a lot in the quality and the reliability surveys that I notice. Some automakers have kind of been dinged, but if you look at the fine print, it's because people complain about the infotainment system. It has nothing to do with the car. It's just like, oh, the radio's complicated. For me, I can overlook a complicated radio if the rest of the car is fantastic. To me, that's not as important. But some people, they don't care about the car. They care about the entertainment system more than anything else. So sometimes the rating, you got to read the details. But I think Consumer Reports is a pretty safe place. Now, they're not super cheap. I thought, oh, why don't I subscribe to Consumer Reports for a month? And I was like, oh, okay.
You can get it through the library for free.
Well, here you are. So you've got a resource right there. Yeah, Consumer Reports is good, for sure.
Do you have any more questions for Mark?
Does anyone have like a driving tip of their own or something they do? Or does anyone have a specific, is there something that you hate about driving or that bothers you and you want to maybe mention it? Because I think we all have our particular quirks, like driving is, it's weird. It's like totally shared. It's this communal thing, but it's very highly personal at the same time. So everyone has their own relationship with their car and with driving. I think people get too emotional when they're driving. I'm guilty of it. I'm getting so much better now though. But I watch people get their blood boiling over other people and it's like, don't like, just forget that guy, I know it's frustrating. It's so frustrating, but what's funny is, you'll be screaming and yelling, who's this idiot? What is this guy doing? He's crazy. And then 2 minutes later at the grocery store, you're holding the door open for him. They're like, oh, how you doing, sir? Nice to see you. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Yeah. It's like, I don't know. It seems like all bets are off when we're driving. So, I try to share the road and model courteous behavior, and it seems to work. When I drive courteously, next thing you know, somebody behind me and they have a gap, and I'm like, oh, I have a gap and they have a gap. They must think like I do. And next thing you know, maybe 10 people in a row all driving the right way, maybe we'll start a revolution. Who knows? But
Well, thank you so much, Mark. This has been wonderful.
Good, I appreciate it. I feel like I went on too long, but
No, it's a lot of information.
Very
And
helpful.
I typed up all these links, so I'll send them in an email along
Yeah.
with John Paul's info.
yeah, and you have my email
Thank
address, so feel free to send it out to the group too. If anyone has any questions at all, or if they want to talk to me privately, feel free.
I'll do
I'm
that.
happy to spend time with anyone. If you have a grandchild and you need help with a car seat, we do those virtually. So reach out to me for that too, okay?
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone
Great.
have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Bye.
Very informative.
Very helpful.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.